Maybe you're sitting with a quiet cuppa, hands warm around the mug, or you're lying down already, unwinding as the day loosens its laces. Perhaps you're on a late train, earphones in, letting the windows turn to stars. Wherever you are, let the pace fall to something gentle. Before we begin, let your breath slow. Find a comfortable place to rest. If calm science helps you drift, make it easy to find this space again. Feel free to subscribe whenever it suits you. Tonight we'll take a quiet journey through our solar system, from warm light near the sun to the thin dark beyond the planets. We will move at an easy pace. No rush, just the simple comfort of knowing where we are in the wider sky. If you've joined us before, it's great to have you back. If this is your first time, we're thrilled you're here. This is a cozy, expanding group that loves laid-back, engaging science. About 4.5 billion years ago, a cloud of gas and dust drifted through the Milky Way. Something nudged it, perhaps the passing shock from a distant star's death, and the cloud began to collapse. As it fell inward, it turned a little faster, the way a skater spins when they draw their arms in. Material gathered at the centre and grew hot. That was the young sun. Around it, the leftover dust and ice flattened into a wide, thin disk. Tiny grains met, stuck, and grew. Pebbles became stones. Stones merged into mountain-sized bodies. Over long stretches of time, they became the worlds. Close to the newborn sun, space was warm. Light gases could not linger. Heavy, rocky materials stayed, so the inner places formed compact worlds of metal and stone. Farther out the light fell and the air thinned. Ices could remain. There the growing cores gathered not only rock and ice, but also deep envelopes of hydrogen and helium. That is why small rocky planets live near the sun and large gaseous worlds circle in the cold. The sun now holds almost all the mass in this system. Its light crosses the space to Earth in a little over 8 minutes. Inside the sun, hydrogen turns into helium and releases energy that warms the surfaces we know. From time to time, the sun's magnetic field sends out gusts and flares. They wash across the space around the planets and shape thin winds that never quite stop. Everything we will visit answers to that steady engine. Closest to the light is Mercury. It is small, old, and scarred with craters. Day on its surface runs hot. Night falls to deep cold. Mercury loops around the sun in only 88 Earth days, while its slow spin stretches a single Mercury day across many of our weeks. It is a reminder that worlds can be simple and still carry long stories in their skin. Next comes Venus. It is almost Earth's twin in size, but its mood is different. A thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide and cloud wraps the planet like a heavy coat. At the ground, the pressure would press on you as if you were under an ocean, and the temperature would stay near the heat of an oven. Venus turns very slowly and in the opposite direction to most planets. The sun would appear to rise in the west and set in the east, if you could see it through the high clouds. Venus shows how climate can run away when heat is trapped and cannot easily escape. Then there is Earth, a blue and white sphere with liquid water on its surface, orbiting at a distance where oceans can remain, neither frozen solid nor boiled away. Our air is a careful mix, shaped over billions of years by geology, sunlight, and life. One large moon circles us and steadies the planet's tilt, smoothing the seasons. When you step outside and feel night air on your face, you're standing on a world placed in a narrow, fortunate band around an ordinary star. Not far beyond is Mars, smaller and cooler. Dry valleys cross its surface. Dust lifts in long winds. Early in its history, rivers ran and lakes stood in basins we can still trace. The air is thin now, and water mostly hides as ice. 2 small moons, Phobos and Deimos, drift close by, likely captured objects from long ago. People look at Mars and think of home because its shapes are familiar. Canyons, dunes, and polar caps, only quieter. Between Mars and Jupiter, space holds a wide belt of asteroids. It is not crowded as in the movies. Most stones are far apart. Many are the size of mountains or smaller. One, Ceres, is large enough to be called a dwarf planet. The belt is a store of early pieces that never joined into a full world, kept apart by nearby gravity. And then we begin to feel the reach of Jupiter, largest of the planets, with clouds banded in creams and soft reds, and a storm that could swallow Earth whole and still have room around the edges. Jupiter's gravity shapes paths near and far. It gathers some objects, nudges others, and can fling the smallest on new long journeys. Around it, many moons circle in calm order. 4 are large and bright, each a world with its own character. One is volcanic and restless. One hides a deep ocean beneath smooth ice. One carries its own magnetic field. One is old and cratered like a memory that will not fade. We will drift there next and then onward to the pale light of Saturn and the quiet blue of the ice giants beyond. Jupiter waits like a quiet giant, not loud, not hurried, just present. Its cloud tops flow in soft bands, light and dark, driven by deep winds that circle the planet. The great red spot turns like a slow storm of memory, older than any living person, shrinking and swelling across the centuries, yet still holding its oval shape. Lightning flickers in clouds far below the tops, and ammonia and water dance through layers we only glimpse from passing craft. The planet's magnetism stretches far into space, catching charged particles and guiding them into wide belts that glow and hiss in radio waves we can translate into sound. Gravity here is a sculptor. Orbits bend. Paths shift. Small bodies learn new routes and carry those routes with them long after they leave. 4 bright moons move in a neat line, each different, each with a mood of its own. Io is restless and hot below the surface. Tides from Jupiter and from its siblings knead it day after day, turning rock into motion. Volcanoes rise and collapse. Plumes leap into space and fall back as frost. The surface changes quickly for a moon, painting fresh yellows and blacks where old plains once lay. Europa is quieter on the outside. Its crust is smooth and pale, crossed by long dark lines where ice has cracked and shifted. Beneath that shell, an ocean likely circles the entire world, kept liquid by the same gentle heating that stirs Io. There may be more water there than in all Earth's oceans combined, kept in darkness, touching warm rock below. Ganymede is larger than Mercury, and somehow wears a magnetic field of its own, a small sign of motion inside. Callisto keeps old scars and deep craters, a record of time written in ice and stone. Together they form a small system with rhythms that lock and unlock, pushing and pulling in a pattern that never quite ends. Beyond Jupiter, the light turns honey pale, and the rings of Saturn appear. From a distance they look solid, like a single shining disk. Up close they are a family of countless pieces of ice and dust, each on its own path, each kept in place by gravity's patient rules. Some pieces are as fine as powder, some are the size of houses. Moons carve clean gaps, waves ripple where orbits tug on orbits. Seen edge-on, the rings seem to vanish into a line that almost isn't there. Turn them face-on and they spread wider than you expect, fragile and bright. Saturn itself is calm to the eye. Cream bands and subtle ovals drift under a high atmosphere. The planet is so light for its size that, on average, it would float in a great enough ocean. Numbers like that feel playful, but they hint at a world built from gases and ices gently layered over time. The moons of Saturn carry their own surprises. Titan is thick with atmosphere, orange and hazy, with air pressure at the ground a little higher than Earth's. Liquid methane and ethane gather in lakes and rivers that branch and merge, cut shorelines, and leave smooth deltas at their mouths. Rain falls. Clouds form and dissolve. It is a cold mirror of water's dance on Earth, using different molecules under a weaker sun. Enceladus is smaller, bright as fresh snow. Near its south pole, long fractures vent plumes of water that rise into space and fall as frost dusting the surface. Inside, a global ocean likely touches warm rock, mixing salts, simple organics, and heat in ways that speak to chemistry's patience. We've flown through those plumes and tasted the grains. Each pass adds a clue, and the clues keep pointing to a living chemistry in the dark. Out where Saturn's pull fades, space opens again, quieter and bluer. The next giants sit farther apart, and the sun is now more lamp than fire. Yet the same rules still hold. Light flows, heat escapes, gravity curves the paths, and atmospheres shape weather in long, slow breaths. Uranus appears as a blue-green disk, faint rings traced close to the planet, and moons scattered like small pearls. Something in its past likely tipped it, leaving the axis almost lying on its side so that seasons can last for decades, and sunlight can linger over a pole for an entire long summer. The world turns with quiet dignity, and its atmosphere folds into gentle bands, subtle but real. Neptune lies deeper and richer in blue. Winds here can run faster than anywhere else in the system, racing around the planet high above unseen depths. Dark ovals appear and fade over the years, storms made of gas and sunlight and rotation, bound by the same equations that shape weather on Earth. Triton circles Neptune the wrong way, a clue that it was likely captured from the distant Kuiper Belt. Its surface shows plains and pits and geyser-like jets that may be driven by sunlight warming a thin layer under a translucent frost. Even this far out, heat and light still find ways to move matter and write patterns on the ground. From here, the planets thin into small worlds, and the path leads outward toward the belt beyond Neptune. The light weakens, but the story continues, told in ice and rock and graceful, elongated orbits that carry secrets from the system's early days. We will drift into that dim country next, where Pluto and its neighbours turn slowly under a sun that looks like a bright, steady star. Out here the light has a different kind of patience. The sun no longer feels like a nearby fire. It is a bright, steady star that hangs above a field of slow stones. This is the Kuiper Belt, a wide band of small worlds beyond Neptune where cold keeps its shape. The space between objects is vast, yet the family is real. Each body follows a quiet path set long ago, circling on timescales that make a human life feel like a single soft breath. Imagine a ring of distance rather than metal or ice shavings. It stretches tens of times farther from the sun than Earth sits, a hushed country where heat from the centre is thinned to a gentle glow. The worlds here are made of rock and many forms of ice, water ice, strong as granite in this cold, nitrogen ice, methane ice, carbon monoxide ice, each with its own way of gleaming. Sunlight touches these surfaces very slowly. Over millions of years, light and charge particles turn simple molecules into darker reddish coatings. That is why some of these bodies carry a warm tint even under a weak blue day. The belt is not one simple ring. Long ago, the giant planets shifted their places a little, trading momentum with the loose material around them. Neptune moved outward by a small but important amount. As it drifted, its rhythms swept across this distant plane and set up patterns. Some objects settled into a neat ratio with Neptune's year. For every 3 orbits they make, Neptune makes 2. Those are the resonant ones, held not by a rope but by timing. Others remained in a calmer lane with rounder paths and gentle tilts. Astronomers call those the cold classicals, not because of temperature, but because their orbits are cool and quiet. Still others were thrown onto more stretched paths, pulled along like ovals that come in closer and then slide far away. These are the scattered bodies, each one telling of a near miss in a younger time. Many worlds here travel as pairs. Two similar bodies circle a shared centre, partners that likely formed side by side then stayed together. One of the most delicate things we have seen is a little contact binary called Arakoth, two lobes resting against each other like snow shapes pressed together by hand. Its gentle form tells a gentle story. In this quiet place, pieces could meet and hold without shattering. That is a different kind of growth than the violent mergers near the Sun, and it preserves a memory of how softly planets can begin. Some of these distant objects carry rings, thin and pale and unexpected, narrow strands that prove even small gravity wells can collect and sort debris. Others spin so quickly they become stretched, not quite spheres, more like footballs of ice with bright, sharp edges. A few wear the marks of old collisions, basins and ridges that rise in the low gravity like careful sculptures. Each detail is slower out here. Erosion is mostly light. Winds are rare. The past lingers near the surface. Comets that sweep through our skies often begin in this region. A gentle nudge can change a safe loop into a long inward arc. As they fall toward the Sun, ices begin to lift and form tails that glow like breath in winter air. Most of those short returning comets come from this belt, rewritten travellers that keep appointments with the inner system for a while before their stores run low. Others come from a much larger and farther stockpile, a distant shell we will visit later. Together they are the messengers of the edges, bringing ancient material toward the warmth and showing us what the early disk was made of. The Kuiper Belt also holds worlds large enough to be round, shaped by their own gravity into spheres or something close. They are not planets by current rules, but they feel like members of a noble class. Their surfaces can be complex even in this deep cold. Subtle seasons can move frosts from place to place. Thin atmospheres can appear when they are closer to the Sun, and then settle back as rime when they drift outward again. Light filters through these faint veils and makes halos that seem too soft to be real. Yet cameras have caught them and showed us how even weak sunlight can build beauty at the edge. Pluto lives here, moving on an oval that sometimes brings it closer to the Sun than Neptune, and then sends it back into the dim. It keeps company with a large moon, Charon, so similar in size that the pair circle a point in the space between them. That shared dance makes tides inside each world and may help keep their surfaces fresh. When a small craft from Earth flew past, it found a heart-shaped plain of nitrogen and carbon monoxide ice, smooth and relatively young, bordered by mountains of water ice that stand as firm as rock. Haze layers rose and fell through the thin air like stacked curtains. You can see the way heat and cold play chase on a world where noon is gentle and night is long. Beyond Pluto there are other notables with their own ways of being. One is heavy and far and seems to have a surface bright with fresh frost. Another spins so fast it is stretched and accompanied by a thin ring. Another is a little smaller and wears a patchwork of light and dark that hints at surface change. Each name carries a story, but the shared lesson is simple. The solar system did not stop inventing itself at the orbit of Neptune. It kept building and trimming and trying variations in the quiet, and those variations still orbit in plain view if you have the patience and the reach to look. We can rest here for a moment and let the cold feel friendly. Distance is not emptiness. It is just another kind of room, one that leaves time for gentle chemistry and long memory. When we are ready, we will follow the line of comets outward in imagination. past the last of the belt's known citizens, toward the deeper dark where a great slow cloud may wait like a shell around everything we know. Out beyond the last slow stones of the belt, the dark opens like a deep lake at night. The sun becomes a lantern you can hide with your thumb at arm's length. Here we imagine a vast, loose shell of small bodies surrounding everything we know, a cloud so wide that its outer parts may sit a good fraction of the distance to the nearest stars. It is not a ring or a disk. It is a kind of snowfall stretched into space and thinned until each flake is alone. The pieces are mostly ice with a little rock, a sleep in cold that keeps time still. We call it the Oort cloud, though we have not seen it directly. We infer it from the visitors that sometimes arrive on long bright arcs and then are gone. If you could stand beside one of those sleepers, you would see very little. A dark lump, rough as pumice, a kilometre across or smaller, perhaps larger, coated by chemistry written slowly by weak sunlight and stray particles from the galaxy. The stars would be sharp and countless. The sun would be a point of light a long way off. There would be no sound, only the faint pull of gravity that ties everything together no matter how far it wanders. These bodies were likely thrown outward long ago by the giant planets, while the system was young and crowded. Most escaped entirely, some did not. They climbed far from the centre, and then slowed just enough to remain bound, caught on loops so wide that a single path around the sun can take millions of years. Out here, space is not perfectly still. The galaxy has its own tides, gentle stretches and squeezes from the combined pull of distant stars and the mass of the Milky Way itself. From time to time, another star passes within a few light years, and its soft tug tilts or lengthens some of the sleeping orbits. A small nudge is enough. A body that has dozed undisturbed for ages can find itself on a new long fall toward the inner system. The arc inward is slow at first, almost lazy, then faster as gravity gathers it. For a very long time, no one in the bright inner rooms would know it was coming. As the visitor draws close, sunlight begins to work on the surface. Ices warm and lift away as gas. Dust comes loose and forms a veil around the small core. Two tails appear, one made of gas pushed straight by light and the solar wind, the other a curved stream of dust that traces the path. From Earth we watch and give the traveller a name, measure its period if it has one, and learn a little more about the quiet reservoir it left behind. When it turns around the sun and heads back out, it will dim again. The veils will collapse and the core will return to cold, keeping a new shape carved by its brief meeting with warmth. Not every visitor will come back. Some are altered by the planets as they pass, their paths changed into one-time plunges from the far dark and back again. Others will be captured for a while into shorter periods and return every few years or decades until their supplies run thin. Either way, they are messengers from a place we cannot yet see, carrying material from the dawn of our system into the light where we can examine it. Grains from a tail can be caught high in our atmosphere and studied. Spectra taken through telescopes can separate the colours and reveal the mix of molecules. Each measurement is a small, careful way of touching the edge. The Oort cloud that we picture may have layers. Closer in, the orbits are still very long, but not as long as the outermost ones. Farther out, the shell thins until the distinction between ours and theirs is just a matter of habit because gravity does not draw borders. Our system moves through the galaxy, circling its centre on a path that takes hundreds of millions of years. The cloud travels with us, a loose, dim halo. Over ages, encounters and tides rearrange the details, but the overall shape remains, a memory of youth expanded to the size of a small sea of space. It is comforting in a quiet way to think that the system wears a coat of beginnings. The inner places are busy and bright. Worlds turn, weather shifts, fields breathe. The outer places hold the archive. A small body kept at a great distance is like a page pressed between clean sheets. Little heat, little stirring, long preservation. When one page is loosened and drifts inward, we read a line or two by sunlight, then file the memory and let it go. The next page may not arrive for a lifetime, or it may appear when the night is clear and many people look up at once. From the imagined edge, we can turn our thoughts inward and see the whole structure at once, the sun at the centre, the rocky worlds close in, the giants farther out, the belts and families and clouds, each born from the same disk, each obeying the same rules. Patterns repeat in gentle variations. Disks become rings, rings collect into moons, moons and small worlds carry hints of oceans under ice. Atmospheres rise where heat and gravity allow them. Winds and storms write the same mathematics in different colours. As we begin the long drift back toward the light, we can let those patterns line up in the mind, simple and elegant, familiar even at scales that are hard to hold. The path inward begins at the edge of the sun's reach, where its wind grows thin and finally yields to the breath of the galaxy. The bubble around us is made of particles streaming outward from the sun, a quiet flow that carves a cavity in the interstellar medium. Far from home, that flow slows and bunches as if meeting a soft wall. Beyond that is a delicate boundary where space between stars takes over. 2 small messengers from Earth have crossed that line and sent back news that the breeze is different there, colder in its manner, older in its origin. Even so, the sun's presence is felt far beyond sight, a memory of warmth carried by fields that twist and unwind in spirals. As we move toward the centre again, the spiral begins to matter. The sun rotates, and its wind carries magnetic lines outward like threads from a turning wheel. Those lines curve, forming an elegant pattern that wraps the orbits. Charged particles follow those paths. Sometimes they rush along them and form storms that skim past worlds. Sometimes they are slowed, piled up, and turned aside. Cosmic rays from deep space try to enter, and the sun's mood decides how many succeed. During active years, fewer reach the inner rooms. During quieter years, more drift through. It is one more rhythm layered on the larger cycles of orbits and seasons. Where a planet has a strong magnetic field, the solar wind does not simply strike and pass on. It flows around and leaves a teardrop wake. Near the poles, some particles find paths down into the atmosphere and light it from within. Curtains glow, arcs ripple. On some nights the colours change like breath, green giving way to red, then violet at the edges. The soundless performance tells you that invisible fields are working, guiding small things in thin air to make a visible bloom. Even a world without a global field can glow where fields form locally, or when the wind is strong and the air is high enough to be touched. Closer still, dust becomes a presence. There's a faint veil of tiny grains spread through the inner system. When night is dark and the horizon is clean, you can sometimes see a soft triangle along the path of the sun in the morning or evening, a tender brightness called zodiacal light. Each grain is warmed and cooled every day of its small orbit, and together they make a river of glow that most people never notice until someone points it out. Ships we have sent feel that dust as gentle taps. Meteoroids of larger size meet Earth now and then, most of them fine enough to flare and vanish in a second. On certain nights, when our path flows through the long trail of a comet, the sky flickers with many such lines, each a grain meeting air at speed and turning to light. Gravity arranges other quiet gatherings, at special places where the pull of a planet and the sun balance in a moving frame. Small bodies can linger. There are 5 such locations for every pair, but 2 are especially welcoming, sitting 60 degrees ahead of and behind the planet in its orbit. Jupiter keeps great swarms there, one leading, one trailing, patient schools of rock that ride with a giant around the sun. Other planets have smaller escorts of their own. These places are not marked by any sign. The balance is a matter of timing and motion, a soft agreement written in the calculus of curves. Tides carry the story inward and outward at every scale. The moon lifts oceans on Earth and slows our spin a little with each passing age. The same trade works between moons and their planets, and between planets and the sun. Energy moves, spins adjust. Orbits change slowly, like clay taking a thumbprint over hours instead of seconds. Io's volcanism is a tide story. Europa's ocean warmth is a tide story. The gentle lock that makes one side of our moon face us forever is another chapter of the same book. Balance is never still. It is a dance that preserves the whole by shifting the parts. We pass again through the country of the giants, but now their presence reads as a set of responsibilities. Jupiter reshapes paths that would otherwise cross and collide. Saturn sorts ice into bands and keeps them clean at the edges with the help of small shepherds. The ice giants keep watch over the gate to the distant belt. None of this is purpose. It is simply what gravity and time do when given a disk and the freedom to work. Yet to a mind inclined to meaning, the order feels kind, like a weathered hand that has learned how to carry weight without dropping it. The inner rooms return with their sharper light. The asteroid families are sparse but full of memory. Some stones are fragments of shattered worlds, iron cores that cooled and then were broken, their metallic faces etched with lines that speak of slow crystallization. Others are darker, rich with carbon-bearing compounds that hint at the chemistry available when water and rock meet in small, warm pockets. There are even visitors that came from other systems entirely, carrying a slightly different recipe, caught in our gaze for a brief season, and then gone again on hyperbolic paths. Every path we cross is a clue to how disks behave when they turn, and how worlds take shape from fine dust and patient sticking. Earth's orbit is a circle drawn by years. Its tilt turns our seasons and moves the edge of day north and south across maps and garden walls. The moon's pull makes tides that run across coasts and into bays, then back out again, twice most days. The air absorbs heat in the day and releases it at night, shifting winds from sea to land and back. These are modest things compared to the long loops of comets, or the broad fields of the giants, yet they are the rhythm we feel with skin and ear and eye. The same physics runs through all of them, energy flowing from warm to cool, motion trading places with height, momentum conserved like a promise kept. When we lift our gaze, the system looks less like a set of separate objects and more like a single piece of music. Themes recur, rings echo disks, moons echo planets, storms recur at different sizes in different atmospheres. Oceans find ways to exist under ice in more than one place. Winds couple to rotation and make bands and spots wherever gas is deep and a planet turns. The numbers change, the constants do not. Those constants make the comfort. You could sleep under them. You could learn under them. They make a roof that is both real and comprehensible, a pattern that holds from the smallest drift of dust to the long, slow arc of a comet on its return. From that comfort we can let our thoughts drift toward the source of it all, not as a blaze to stare into, but as a living, steady engine. The sun is close enough to warm our oceans and far enough to fit inside a fingertip held at arm's length. Its face looks smooth from here, yet up close it shivers with texture. Bright cells rise and fade like the surface of a gently boiling pot, each one a plume of hot gas given up heat and sinking again. Along the edges of some days, darker islands appear and drift. Cooler patches with tangled magnetism that mark where the field beneath has pushed through. Over years, those islands come and go with a rhythm that runs longer than a school term and shorter than a lifetime. The count rises, the count falls, and the wind in space answers, strong in busy years, softer in quiet ones. Beneath the light, pressure holds a long conversation with gravity. In the deep interior, the squeeze is so great that hydrogen can fuse into helium and release energy, not in a flash, but in a patient cascade. That energy makes its way outward by many small steps, scattering and pausing, passing on until it reaches layers where it can finally flow as light. What we feel on our skin began as a whisper far below, took a long route through moving gas, then crossed the empty space as a clean beam that a leaf can drink and a rock can warm. The sun turns, but not like a solid ball. Near its equator, the surface completes a spin faster than the high latitudes. That uneven motion winds the magnetic field into spirals and loops. Some loops grow and arch above the surface like wire pulled from a spool, holding hot gas in graceful forms that hover for hours or days. Sometimes a loop changes shape and snaps, and a surge of material rushes outward and spreads. Most of it flows past harmlessly, a breath dispersed in a great room. Now and then the timing is close and a world is in the path. When it is our world, the sky near the poles writes a light show, and power grids hum a little differently for a while. Look along the sun's edge, and you would see a thin layer where most of the visible light is made, then a higher region where the air grows more rare and, strangely, much hotter than the surface below. That outer veil is faint except during an eclipse, when the moon hides the bright disk and a white crown unfolds against the dark. The crown flickers with fine jets and waves stirred by the restless field. Space there is not empty. It is a thin river of charged particles that flows in every direction, carrying the sun's mood across the orbits. The river does not hurry, but it is steady, and over time it shapes a bubble in the material between the stars the way a slow spring can carve a pool in dry ground. We listen to the sun as well as watch it. Patterns of sound, too low for ears but real in the gas, ripple through its body and ring like a bell heard from inside. From those ripples we learn about layers we cannot touch. We also count invisible messengers that pass through matter almost without noticing it. They tell us the fusion in the core is working as we think, because they come straight out carrying news that light cannot bring until long after. Watching and counting in these quiet ways makes the star feel closer, not in distance, but in understanding. The sun's light writes the calendar. Our year is the loop we make around it. The tilt of our axis writes the seasons, leaning one pole toward the warmth and then the other, while the middle stays steady and trades length of day for height of sun. At the edges of those tilts, the sun appears to pause on the horizon from one dawn to the next, higher or lower by only a breath, and people have marked those pauses with stones and songs for as long as we remember. On 2 days a year the path crosses exactly midway, and daylight balances with night. The sky does not announce these moments with trumpets. It changes by minutes across weeks, and then, one morning, the light arrives at a familiar angle and something in us notes the turn. Our moon answers to the sun as well as to Earth. When the lines line up just so, shadows draw careful shapes. Sometimes the moon's shadow sweeps across Earth, and day becomes a deep twilight for a few minutes along a narrow path. Birds quiet. People look up and share a hush. Sometimes Earth's shadow falls on the moon, and its face turns copper as light skims through our air and bends into the dark, carrying the colours of many sunsets to paint the lunar plains. These events are not rare on the scale of centuries, yet each one feels private, a reminder that geometry can be tender when seen from a human place. The same light that times our seasons paints the planets for our eyes. One of them rises brilliant before dawn or glows after sunset, never far from the sun because it circles inside our orbit. Another burns a soft red when it's opposite the sun in our sky, close enough for its colour to show. Two more shine steadily and outlast the night, one golden, one white with a hint of cream. Sometimes they gather near one another by perspective alone, a meeting that means nothing to them and everything to those who watch. Long ago they were just wanderers against fixed stars. Now we know their paths well enough to send craft to meet them, to linger and learn, and to leave again with measured praise. As we drift inward in thought, the sun's influence becomes more than heat and light. It is the metronome of the whole piece. Every orbit takes its cue from the pull at the centre. Every breeze in thin air, every faint tail of a comet, every ring that stays narrow, every moon that keeps one face to its planet, owes its timing to the gravity that the sun provides. Nothing here rushes. When change is needed, it is written over years or ages. That pace is forgiving. It lets us trace cause to effect without panic. It lets us sleep under a sky that is moving and at the same time feels still. We will not stay at the centre. The comfort of a hearth is real, but so is the desire to visit the rooms around it. When we leave again, we can carry this understanding like a simple tool. Light flows outward, fields thread the space, and gravity holds the whole. With that, even the far edges feel less lonely, as if every distant grain were still in quiet conversation with the star that began the story. Close to the sun, the story becomes intimate and quick. The first small world is Mercury, a dark bead that rushes around the sun in just 88 of our days. It turns slowly as it goes, locked in a neat rhythm, 3 spins for every 2 orbits. That timing means the same long dawns and long afternoons return to the same places again and again, baking rock until it glows, and then letting it chill to nights so cold that heat seems like a memory. There is almost no air to hold warmth, only a thin exosphere made from atoms kicked off the surface by sunlight and by tiny impacts. Sodium and potassium trace ghostly plumes that telescopes can see, a breath so faint that it counts as presence only because space is emptier still. Under the crust lies an oversized iron core, a clue to a rough youth. Perhaps early impacts stripped away lighter layers, or perhaps the hot nebula near the sun simply favoured metal. The world has shrunk a little as its interior cooled, and the skin has wrinkled into long, low cliffs that run for hundreds of kilometres. They look like the folds in a fruit left to dry on a windowsill. A great basin called Caloris marks a blow from the system's early days. On the far side, the ground is oddly rumpled, as if the whole planet rang and settled after the strike. In some bright patches, shallow depressions called hollows dot the rock, places where delicate minerals likely vanished into space under relentless light. Near the poles, where the sun never climbs high, crater shadows stay cold enough to keep water ice. Even here, this close to the heat, darkness can save a small stash of frost. Step outward, and the light softens through a high, bright veil. Venus is almost Earth-size, but its air is thick with carbon dioxide pressed under clouds of sulfuric acid droplets. At the ground, the pressure would squeeze like deep ocean, and the temperature would hold steady near the heat of an oven that never turns off. The planet spins backward and very slowly, so a day is longer than a year, and winds high above race around the globe in only a few Earth days, dragging the cloud tops into smooth, continuous bands. Radar eyes have mapped the surface through that veil and found a world of broad volcanic plains, dome-topped features and rough highlands called tesserae. The crust looks young in places, as if the planet renews itself from below, not with the tidy plates we know on Earth, but with episodes that spread new rock like poured batter. Whether eruptions still rise today is a careful, ongoing question. The air has no strong magnetic shield to hold off the solar wind, yet the planet keeps its cloak by sheer quantity, and sunlight high in the sky paints the clouds a constant luminous white. Venus carries a lesson about climate written in clear, large letters. Trapped heat begets more trapped heat when air grows dense and clouds close ranks. There is beauty in the way the system achieves its balance, but the balance sits at a temperature far from our comfort. Long ago people named Venus the morning star and the evening star, because it never strays far from the sun in our sky. It is faithful to the horizon, brilliant just before dawn or after sunset, a lantern bright enough to cast a shadow. Knowing what lies beneath that glow gives the light a second meaning, lovely to the eye, stern in its facts. Another small step outward, and the colour turns to blue and white. Earth is steady water and moving air, the ground we know by foot and by memory. Its distance from the sun lets oceans exist as liquid, and its size lets it hold an atmosphere that carries heat from day to night, and from equator to pole. In the rock are slow engines, volcanoes and drifting plates that recycle crust and raise mountains. In the air are fast engines that make weather in patterns we can feel with skin and hear with open windows. The mix of gases is not an accident. Over long time, life itself has tuned the recipe, taking light apart and rebuilding it in sugars, then trading that energy across webs that reach from soil to leaf to muscle to thought. A single large moon circles us and steadies our tilt. That steadiness smooths the seasons and helps keep climate swings within ranges that living things can survive and adapt to. Tides lift and lower the edges of seas, rinse estuaries and keep coastlines breathing. Look up from any quiet place on Earth, and the moon is there often enough to count as company. It is large for a moon, and likely born from a collision early in Earth's history, when a Mars-sized body struck, and the shared debris gathered into a companion. One face always looks our way, locked by tides so that mountains and mare we know by eye rise in the same pattern each month. Its pull stirs our oceans and slows our spin by a fraction of a breath each day. In return, the moon drifts away a little each year, a slow dance set by gravity's bookkeeping. When sunlight lands low on its surface, craters throw long shadows and the ground looks new again, as if time had paused to let relief and texture tell their story. From Earth, the sky offers quiet signs of our neighbourhood that anyone can learn. The bright wanderer low after sunset is often Venus. A steady mocha-coloured lamp that does not twinkle is usually Jupiter. A golden one farther along the arc may be Saturn. A reddish point that grows bold every couple of years is Mars when it comes near. Their paths do not cross the whole sky at random. They follow a shared band because the system is flat and we are inside it, looking along the plane. Once you notice that, you can stand in a garden or on a balcony and feel not just that there are planets, but that they are moving with you in a gentle pattern, bound to the same centre. We have machines among them now, quiet craft that borrow momentum from one world to reach another, then reshape their paths with small burns. They coast more than they push, trusting the sun's pull and the clean geometry of ellipses. When one arrives, it becomes local to that world and listens, to radio hiss in a magnetosphere, to pebbles tapping a hull in a ring, to the faint sound of dust striking a detector in the dark between. The stories they send home are measured in images and fields and spectra, but what they give us is simpler. They add detail to belonging. They let us say not only that Jupiter has bands, but how those bands move, not only that Pluto has ice, but how it flows, not only that comets carry dust, but what kinds of dust, and how old those grains are. Knowledge turns distance into something hospitable. We will wander on to Mars in fuller light, and to the belt where fragments keep their long appointment with time, but for a moment it's enough to notice that the inner system holds both warning and welcome. One world too hot under a heavy sky. One world just right for water and breath. One world smaller and colder, keeping the memory of rivers as lines in rust. The differences are not random. They follow from distance, mass, and history. Simple ingredients stirred by sunlight and gravity until each place finds its way. Mars comes into focus as a world that learned to be quiet. Its air is thin, mostly carbon dioxide, and the sky carries a fine dust that turns daylight a soft butterscotch. When the sun is low, the colours reverse and sunsets bloom in blue, as if the atmosphere saves its cool tones for the end of the day. The ground holds long stories. A canyon system stretches like a continent-wide scar, its cliffs so high that clouds can form inside them. Volcanoes rise gentle and broad, built by countless flows that stacked over ages. One of them climbs higher than any mountain on Earth, its slopes so shallow you could walk them without noticing the grade step after patient step. There was running water here once. You can trace valley networks that branch like the roots of a tree, and you can see fans where ancient rivers spread and slowed. In certain craters the floor carries the shape of a lake, with a rim that looks like an old shoreline. Minerals that form in liquid water turn up as small signatures in light reflected from the ground. Ice waits in the shadows of high latitudes and lies buried at middle ones, close enough that a shovel could find it if a hand were there to dig. Today the cold and the low pressure keep surface water from lingering, but the signs of an earlier, wetter time remain clear enough to follow with a finger on a map. The weather speaks in a light voice. Winds raise dust devils that wander like ghosts and write temporary tracks on flat plains. Thin clouds gather over volcanoes in the afternoon and vanish by evening. Each Martian year, carbon dioxide frost grows on the winter pole and then sublimates in spring, breathing the atmosphere in and out by a fraction, a slow pulse that even a small sensor can feel. Some years, dust thickens across the globe and lifts into a storm that lasts for months, dimming the sun so much that solar-powered machines must sit and wait. Between those long moods, the air is calm enough that a feather would fall like a stone. 2 tiny moons keep company with Mars. Phobos skims low, circling faster than the planet turns, rising in the west and setting in the east several times a day. It is slowly spiralling inward and will one day break into a ring or fall in fragments to the ground. Deimos drifts higher and calmer, a small lump that looks like a handful of dark sand pressed into shape. They are likely captured bodies, relics of a busier past in the space between Mars and Jupiter. At night they draw short arcs and then slip below the horizon with little ceremony, a reminder that not every companion is grand. We have sent careful machines to learn the local details. Some rolled and measured the grit beneath their wheels, tasted rocks that had been wet, and watched dust paint their solar panels with a film that grew day by day. Others carry tiny laboratories and drill into stones laid down by water long ago. They read the air for trace gases that might explain chemistry that still surprises us. Orbiters keep watch from above, mapping slopes for future landings and tracking the march of seasons with patient eyes. The reports are calm and precise, but there is warmth between the numbers. It is the warmth of recognition when patterns repeat. River deltas where flow slows and sediments settle. Lake beds with layered margins. Salts that crystallize when water leaves. The same physics we know from Earth, played in a different key. Beyond Mars, the space between orbits broadens into a country of fragments. The asteroid belt is not a clogged highway. It is a wide, sparse family of bodies that mostly keep to themselves. Some are dark and rich in carbon-bearing compounds. Some are stony and bright. A few are heavy with metal, the cause of small worlds that were once molten and then broken by collisions. One large member holds enough mass to pull itself into near spherical shape and earns the quiet title of dwarf planet. Another shows signs of having once separated into layers, with crust and mantle and core like a tiny unfinished Earth. Gaps thread the belt, not because material was scraped away directly, but because timing with a distant giant empties certain paths. When a small body circles in a neat ratio with Jupiter, 3 loops for one of the giants, or 5 for 2, nudges repeat at the same points, and over time pull it onto a safer or a different route. Families gather where a single ancient impact fractured a parent and sent its pieces into neighbouring orbits. Their members share compositions and tilts, cousins drifting together through a slow century. From this reservoir some stones wander inward. Most are small and end as streaks of light when they meet our air. A few are larger and reach the ground. We have held them in our hands and cut them and looked at their insides under microscopes. Some carry chondrules, tiny, once molten beads that speak of flashes of heat in the young disk. Others carry hydrated minerals that formed when water moved through warm rock. A rare set comes from the crust of Mars or the Moon, ejected by impacts and delivered here across years. Each is a message with a date written in isotopes rather than ink. We have also visited specific stones and returned with grains from their surfaces. The samples smell faintly of the laboratory and the launch pad, but their story is older. They confirm that some dark asteroids are rich in organics and simple salts, the kit that chemistry needs when energy and time are available. They suggest that in the early days, deliveries like these could have brought pieces of that kit to young Earth in many small shipments, rather than one grand gift. It is a gentle way to think about origins, not a single spark, but many embers arriving over seasons and catching where conditions were kind. Between the belt and the giants, space holds subtle markers left by gravity's bookkeeping. Some rocks travel in step with planets at stable places 60 degrees ahead of or behind their orbits. We have already seen great schools of these companions riding with a distant giant. Smaller groups follow other worlds too, quieter but just as faithful. The pattern makes sense once you feel it. 3 bodies sharing a rhythm in which pulls cancel and reinforce in just the right way, like 3 hands keeping time on a drum. Ahead lies the realm where gas and ice rule again, and we have touched it in thought already. The banded giant with its storm of centuries, the ringed world with a halo of ice, the tipped blue-green sphere and the deeper blue beyond it. We won't rush. The path from Mars to that wide country passes through long, clean space, and even in the clean there is detail. Dust that makes a soft wedge of a light before dawn, faint streams of meteoroids that visit on certain nights, a quiet sense that everything here is part of the same slow design. When we step outward once more, we will carry Mars's lessons with us. Water remembered, air thinned, warmth kept or lost, and watch how they echo in worlds that kept their gases and let weatherite in deeper layers. Beyond the belt the dark grows blue again, and we meet a world that does not hurry. Jupiter fills its lane with calm authority, not by noise but by mass and patience. Its cloud tops stream in bands that run east and west, light and dark like broad rivers laid side by side. The great storm we have watched for centuries still turns, its colour shifting with time, its borders curling like the edges of a leaf. Lightning flashes deep below, far larger than any on Earth, hidden under layers of ammonia and water cloud. The planet's field spreads wide, a magnetosphere so large it would swallow the moon's orbit many times if placed around our world. Charged particles spiral there and make radio music that instruments can hear. A quiet hiss and whistle that says space is not silent where fields hold sway. Jupiter's size changes matter in ways that feel like new rules. Pressure builds as you descend, squeezing hydrogen until it behaves like a metal, a strange state that conducts and helps power the field. Heat left from formation still leaks outward, so the planet glows in infrared more than it receives from the sun. Nothing on the surface stands still long enough to be a place, yet patterns last. Jets keep to their lanes. Ovals merge and separate. The whole is restless and somehow steady at once. Moons move in clean lines around this giant, each keeping time with the others in ways that never quite repeat yet never fall apart. 3 of the large ones share a rhythm that locks their orbits together. Every so many laps of the innermost, the middle lines up, and after a fixed count, the outer meets them again. That repeated tug pumps energy into their interiors. The smallest of the trio pays in heat and eruptions. The middle saves its warmth beneath an ice crust, where an ocean might lap against stone in a night that never ends. The largest, bigger than Mercury, signals a dynamo within. The farthest of the 4 major moons wears age honestly, craters on craters like a memory preserved. Between the big names, smaller bodies ride too, shepherding faint rings or holding to tight paths that lace the empty with company. Jupiter does more than host a family. It tidies the neighborhood. Asteroids gather at special places ahead of and behind it in orbit, 2 swarms that ride with the planet as if they were distant escorts. Comets that fall inward are bent by its pull. Some are flung outward, some redirected, a few shattered into trains that later meet our skies. You can think of the giant as a heavy stone placed in a stream. The flow changes around it, and eddies appear, and paths that would have crossed the centre now curve aside. No intention is needed. Mass and motion write their own quiet policy. Saturn appears farther along, pale gold with a sign you can see in any small telescope. From afar, the rings look like a single bright plate. Up close, they resolve into countless pieces of ice, most the size of snowballs or stones, some grains, some boulders, each on its own orbit. Gravity sorts them into lanes and keeps sharp edges where small moons patrol. Ripples run through the bands where orbits resonate, frozen waves that march slowly and show how even debris can carry a tune. Now and then a wandering rock drags a faint groove as it ploughs through and moves on. Seen edge on, the rings nearly vanish, a silver line too thin to believe. Seen face on, they span a space wider than the distance from Earth to the Moon, yet they are so slender that the main sheet would vanish within the height of a city tower. Saturn itself is light and layered, its average density is less than water, a playful fact that still says something real about its makeup. Broad currents flow under the soft bands, and storms blossom and fade like pale flowers that come with the season and then are gone. At the North Pole, a jet streams into a hexagon, a shape the atmosphere holds as if a geometric idea had found a home in gas. The planet also leaks heat, though more quietly than its larger neighbour. The field is weaker, but still strong enough to bend the wind of the sun and paint auroras in high latitudes, curtains that would look gentle and enormous from a moon's night side. Those moons are a country of their own. One is wrapped in a thick orange haze with rivers and lakes that do not hold water, but a colder cousin flowing under a dim sun. Another, bright and small, vents water into space from cracks near a pole. The spray rises as plumes and falls as snow, feeding a ring so thin you would miss it unless you knew where to look. Grains from those plumes carry salts and simple organics, hints that dark oceans below the ice touch warm rock and make chemistry that does not care how far it is from daylight. Farther out, icy spheres keep to quieter paths, their surfaces scored by fractures and calm plains, each with its own list of small mysteries. Between and beyond the giants, the sun feels more like a lighthouse than a hearth. Yet warmth still matters, and so does time. In thick air, winds couple to a planet's spin and draw belts around it. In deep interiors, heat shifts slowly and feeds fields that shape space. Small tugs repeated become tides and keep worlds alive within. Big tugs, rare, set rocks on new journeys or break them and send their pieces to trace rings. The same simple rules run through it all. Energy moves from hot to cold. Momentum is kept, handed from one traveller to another like a baton. Gravity curves paths and over ages turns accidents into arrangements. We step toward the more distant pair, where colours cool and light thins. One world rolls like a turning barrel, its axis tips so far that seasons take decades, and a pole can stare at the sun while the other forgets it exists, then trade places in slow ceremony. The other keeps its tilt moderate, but its winds are the swiftest in the system, racing around the globe with a speed that would make any storm on Earth seem like a stroll. Both hold more water and methane and ammonia in their mix, so their blues deepen and their weather hides under a calmer skin. Rings there are, but faint and narrow, whispers instead of declarations. Moons there are, and one large companion that circles the wrong way, a captured wanderer whose surface carries jets and planes and colours that speak of nitrogen frost and sunlight working at a whisper. The farther we go, the more the system feels like variations on a theme rather than a gallery of separate scenes. Jets, rings, tides, plumes, storms, fields, each reappears in a slightly different key. You can rest in that. It means the story is large and also graspable. It means that sleep and understanding can share a pillow, while the worlds keep their rounds, and the light continues to cross the dark without haste. Beyond those blue distances, the path does not end. It thins into a quiet archipelago of small, stubborn worlds. We have stepped there in thought already, but we can slow down and linger, because the far country rewards patience. Pluto moves on a stretched path that leans above and below the plane, sometimes closer to the sun than Neptune, sometimes far beyond. It travels with a companion so large that the two turn around a point between them, a shared balance that makes both feel less like planet and moon and more like partners. On Pluto's face, a broad, bright plain of nitrogen and carbon monoxide ice lies like a heart pressed into the dark, smooth and young by the standards of the outer system. Mountains of water ice stand at its edge, strong as rock in that deep cold, their valleys filled by the slow creep of soft ices that can flow there as glaciers do here. High above, sunlight sifts through a thin air and builds layered haze, delicate sheets that stack one upon another and catch the low light like silk. Charon the partner shows a different mood. A dark cap rests at one pole, probably made from faint veils of gas that drifted over from Pluto and fell as frost, then changed into deeper colours under sunlight too weak to warm but strong enough to work. A great canyon system cuts the surface, as if the crust once stretched and cracked, while an interior froze and expanded or changed its balance. Plains are smooth where icy flows once levelled them, then scored by later events. The two bodies pull on each other and trade tides that stir their interiors a little, enough to keep the surfaces from becoming only a tally of ancient hits. Even here, where the sun is a sharp star and the year is long, renewal finds a way. Pluto is not alone. Farther out, a heavy bright world circles in cold dignity, its surface reflecting most of the light that reaches it, as if it wears a coat of fresh frost. A small moon trails it, a quiet companion that turns like a bead on a wire. Closer in, another spins so fast that it stretches into an elongated shape, flanked by a faint ring that proves even modest gravity can gather crumbs into order. Another carries methane ice and a surface that shifts its brightness from place to place, a sign that seasons and slow winds still have something to say. None of these places are loud. They speak in gentle changes, thin air here and there, a tide that moves an icy plain by a few meters across a year, a stain that grows and fades with sunlight's angle. Smaller bodies fill the spaces between. Many travel as pairs, equal partners linked by a shared dance so light that a push from one fingertip would seem to matter. One famous member looks like two snowballs touching, a contact of pieces that met and never parted, a fossil of how growth can happen when speeds are low and collisions are more like greetings than blows. Others wear rings as narrow as threads. A few carry shapes that look like sculptures, all angles and facets, carved by time and chance into forms that would be impossible closer in where heat softens edges. The belt is a schoolroom of beginnings, its lessons written in slow drafts and preserved where weather is too gentle to erase them. These far orbits fall into patterns that make sense once you hear the beat. Some bodies complete 3 loops for every 2 of Neptune, others keep rounder paths in lanes that feel almost undisturbed. Still others were scattered long ago and now follow stretched ovals that dip inward and then fall away into dim. Each group remembers a different chapter from the time when the giants shifted a little and the outer disk adjusted around them. Timing became as important as distance. Small tugs repeated at the same place can clear a path. Small tugs repeated out of step can shelter one. The quiet map we see today is the afterimage of that music. From this cold garden, some rocks and ices are nudged sunward and become the short returning comets that visit every few years or decades. We have watched their paths enough times to predict their arrivals and their fading. They wake near the sun, grow halos and tails, then sleep again when they turn outward. They are messengers with pockets full of ancient grains. Sometimes Earth passes through a trail they left on a previous visit, and our sky writes many brief lines in a night, each one a grain meeting air and leaving light for a heartbeat. It is easy to feel small under that show, but it is also easy to feel included, as if the edge of the system had sent a handful of notes to play on our ceiling. The emptier dark beyond holds the imagined cloud we spoke of before, a deep reservoir for comets that take many lifetimes to return. It is a shell more than a band, a memory of the young system puffed outward by chance and gravity. The nearby galaxy, stars drifting by at respectful distances, the slow tide of the Milky Way's mass, nudges it from age to age. Every so often a sleeping body leans toward the sun and begins a long fall that will write a bright curve over our calendars and stories. Those arrivals are not omens. They are the simplest exchanges between heat and cold, centre and edge, written in the units of years and light and stone. When we turn back inward from these distances, the whole arrangement becomes clearer. The sun at the centre sets the tempo and provides most of the weight. The inner worlds took rock and metal because heat was high. The outer worlds took gas and ice because space there was colder and time allowed larger collections. Rings are just flattened disks that never grew into moons, and moons are planets kept pieces, some born with their hosts, others adopted later. Oceans can hide under ice if tides and deep heat are kind. Magnetism draws curtains of light wherever fields and winds meet. Patterns do not repeat exactly, but they rhyme, and the rhymes teach without effort. You could end the journey here and carry enough to sleep on. You could also let the mind drift once more inward, past the orbits and the dust, back to the star that began the work. There the light is made, there the field is wound, there the wind is spun out. Everything else is a conversation with that source, moderated by distance and mass and history. We do not need to recite the equations to feel how natural the story is. Warm spills into cool, motion curves under pull, small tugs repeated become structure. Given time, even a thin drizzle of sunlight can push a grain along or lift a whisper of gas from ice, and paint a haze around a dwarf world at the edge. If you are lying down with eyes closed, this is a good place to breathe and let the map settle. The planets take their places again in a soft order. The quick one near the heat, the veiled twin, the blue home, the rusted neighbour. Then the belt of fragments. Then the calm giant with its family. The ringed world with its bright surprises. The cool pair beyond. And the low, wide pasture of small worlds that fades into a cloud as big as a thought. None of them demand anything from you. They keep their paths whether you watch or sleep. Knowing them just makes the dark friendlier and gives your night a steady shape to rest against. Io lives closest to the giant and wears that closeness in bright scars. Tides from Jupiter and the rhythm it shares with its neighbours knead the little world day after day. Rock warms, softens, and moves. Volcanoes lift plumes that arc high into the dark and fall again as frost, repainting the ground in yellows and blacks. Mountains rise steeply where the crust buckles, then collapse when the support beneath shifts. Nothing old lasts on the surface for long. Fresh deposits bury yesterday's plains. If you could stand on safe ground and watch, you would see a horizon that changes in seasons measured not by weather, but by heat from below. A little farther out, Europa holds its quiet secret under a bright shell. The crust is smooth and pale, crossed by long lines where ice has cracked and slid. Beneath that lid, an ocean likely circles the entire world, kept liquid by the same gentle tides that torment Io. There may be more water there than on Earth, held in darkness and touching rock at the bottom. Where warm rock meets cold water, chemistry begins to try possibilities. The surface records the pressure from below in places where plates have shifted and refrozen. Blocks of ice seem to have drifted and set like pack ice on an earthly sea. Reddish stains mark spots where salts or simple organics may have reached the light before freezing again. The quiet here is not empty. It is a waiting room for questions that can be answered by careful visits and steady instruments. Ganymede is larger than Mercury and carries a field of its own, a sign that something inside still moves enough to make electricity and set lines around the world. On the face you can read two histories. Dark old regions are heavy with craters. Brighter swathes are younger, lined with grooves where the crust stretched and rearranged. Under the ice there may be layers. Water, then high-pressure ices, then more water, with a salty ocean folded between. Moons teach patience. They show that warmth does not always come from sunlight. It can come from tides and from slow decay of elements in rock, and those sources can keep places alive under lids that look still. Callisto stands farthest of the four and keeps age like a badge. Craters crowd craters in a record that reaches back to early times. Ice and rock mix in the crust and mantle. There are hints of a buried ocean here too, thin and quiet if it exists. But the surface tells the clearer story. A long steady rain of impacts in a place where resurfacing is rare. In that honesty there is comfort. Not every world needs to renew itself to be interesting. Some are libraries, storing pages in order and letting us read them with slow eyes. Leaving Jupiter's family, we carry the theme of hidden water and gentle power. It meets us again among the moons of the next giant. Titan turns under a dense orange sky. The air at the ground feels thicker than ours by a gentle margin, and the cold keeps methane and ethane liquid. Rivers carve channels. Lakes fill dark basins and reflect a dim sun when the air clears. Clouds gather and drift and fall. The cycle is familiar even if the substance is different. Shores change slowly. Deltas build where flow slows. Wind lifts grains and stacks them into long dunes that run like quiet chords across the plains. Beneath the crust there may be another ocean, water and ammonia mixed, kept from freezing by salts and by the soft warmth that deep time can provide. Enceladus is small and very bright, a bead of clean ice with fractures near one pole that breathe. From those long dark lines, water rises as spray and snows back down, covering the surface in fresh frost. Some grains escape and feed a faint ring that hangs like a whisper around the planet. The mix in the plumes carries salts and simple organic molecules, hints that the ocean beneath touches rock and trades heat, and minerals the way seas on Earth do at their deepest ridges. A world only a few 100 kilometers across, finding a way to host liquid water and chemistry, makes the system feel generous. It tells us that oceans can hide in many places if tides and time are kind. Smaller moons around the ringed planet keep tidy orbits and play supporting roles. Some shepherd the rings and keep edges sharp. Some are captured objects, shaped into lumpy sculpture by impacts and by weak gravity that lets cliffs stand higher than they would on a larger world. One looks like a walnut, with a ridge around its equator as if a ring tried to become a moon and then froze into a seam. Another is half bright and half dark, split by a boundary that marks where falling dust settled, over ages on one side more than the other. Each piece adds a small rule or an exception for how ice and dust behave in thin air and slender pull. When we step back from these details, the pattern grows clearer. Where gas is deep and a planet turns quickly, bands and spots appear. Where tides are strong and ice can flow, oceans can hide under shells. Where dust and grains share an orbit, rings thin into sheets and sharpen into lines under the guidance of small companions. Where a field is strong, charged particles draw curtains of light that rise and fade without sound. Worlds that look quiet from afar can carry motion inside. Time and repetition take small pushes and make them into structure. We can rest in that rhythm and let it carry us outward once more to the tipped blue-green world and its deeper cousin. Their skies are cleaner of detail to the eye, but the same ingredients are there. Winds shaped by rotation, clouds of methane that form and dissolve, faint rings that prove orbits keep their ledges even at the edge of sight. One rolls with its axis almost in the plane, making seasons that last for decades at a pole while the other sleeps. The other wears the fastest winds, wrapped tight around a globe that hides its heat and returns it as motion. A large captured moon circles the deep blue one against the flow, surface pale and strange, with planes and pits and jets that suggest sunlight and frost can still write gently, even when warmth is scarce. From there the path grows quieter again, and the small worlds return, but the story no longer feels scattered. It feels like a single piece of music with themes that recur and harmonize. We will let that music guide us back toward the inner rooms, where stone and metal first took shape, and then beyond them to the place where you may be listening now, under a sky that shows a few of these wanderers each clear night if you know where to look. At your scale, the sky's a roof, but it is also a clock that never rushes. The planets keep their lanes along a tilted band, the same path the sun follows through the constellations over a year. That band is the plane of the system seen from inside. When a bright wanderer sits near the sun, it becomes a morning lamp before dawn, or an evening one after sunset. When it swings wide from the sun, it lasts deep into the night and crosses high. None of this is random. It is the straight geometry of circles turned into ellipses, and the gentle truth that we are moving while we watch. Sometimes a planet seems to stop and drift backward for a few weeks. It is not turning around. It is the view from a moving platform. When Earth passes an outer world on the inside lane, our faster motion makes the distant one appear to loop the wrong way against the stars. When an inner world laps us, it seems to backtrack near the sun and then move on. The first time you understand this, the sky changes. It becomes legible. What looked like whims are revealed as perspective. What felt like wandering is revealed as rhythm. Two bright worlds can draw close together by sight alone and hang in the same small patch of dusk. The word for that is simple and old, a conjunction. There are grand versions with long beats between them. The two great outer lords meet about every 20 years by our counting, a steady handshake you can mark across a lifetime. There are quieter pairings too, blue and gold lamps near one another, or a sharp white lantern near a thin moon that looks like it could cradle it. None of these meetings mean anything to the planets themselves. They circle and do not notice. The meaning is with the observer, and that is not a small thing. It is what lets us remember nights by scenes rather than dates. Phases tell another slow story. The moon cycle you already know in your bones. Light grows, pauses, shrinks and rests, and the pace sets moods on coasts and in gardens and in people. The inner planets show phases as well. One displays a tiny disk that swells and thins like a pearl shaving. The other, brighter and bolder, can be a perfect coin or a glowing crescent with a shadowed side dimly lit by sunlight reflected from Earth. Long ago that changing shape settled arguments about what circles what. Even now, in a simple telescope, the thin curve looks like a boat you could launch on black water. You do not need much gear to feel you're sharing the same room with it. Distance turns into time in the cleanest way. Light from the sun takes a little over 8 minutes to reach us. From Jupiter, it takes dozens of minutes more. From the far belt, many hours. When you watch a shadow crawl across a moon, and know you are seeing an eclipse as it happens there, you're also looking a while into the past, not sentimentally but literally, as if memory were built into the beam. That delay is small nearby and enormous between stars, yet the rule is the same everywhere, a universal patience that keeps cause and effect in order. The shapes of orbits are not perfect circles. They are stretched a little, and each world comes closer to the sun at one part of its year and drifts farther at another. The plane is not perfectly shared either. Each path is tilted a little. Because of those tilts and stretches, alignments that could draw a straight line through sun, planet and planet are rare and brief. Eclipses in our system happen all the time, but most are seen only from places we're not standing. This makes the ones we do see feel like presents. A narrow stripe crosses a map, and for a few minutes, day turns to a deep, hushed twilight. Or the shadow falls the other way, and the moon grows red as light passes through our air and bends into the dark. Geometry becomes weather for the soul. On very clear mornings or evenings, you might notice a faint wedge of light leaning up from the place where the sun rose or set. That is the glow of dust along the plane, warmed and reflecting. The whole inner system has a trace of that dust, ground from collisions and shed by comets as they warm. We fly through thicker threads a few times a year, and the sky writes short lines as grains meet air and turn to fire for a heartbeat. The names of those nights come from the constellations near the radiant, but the source is older than the patterns we drew. You can stand under a shower and feel that connection in your chest. A small, honest thing the size of a grain announcing a path written before our calendars existed. We have learned to move within this clock with a skill that still feels like luck when you think about it at night. To reach a planet, we fall toward the sun, and then steal a little speed from a world's motion by brushing its gravity well. A tidy exchange that costs the donor nothing measurable, and gives the traveller a new path. The craft turns its face to the sun to drink power, or hides behind a heat shield and takes a gulp of air to slow down without fuel. It reads the sky with star trackers because the stars are the best rulers we know. It arrives months or years after launch and glides into local time as if it had always belonged there. From then on, it is just another object, obeying the same few rules as everything else. The longer you sit with those rules, the softer they become. Gravity is not a command, it is a curve in the room. Orbits are not chains, they are agreements between motion and pull. Heat does not vanish, it spreads out until it rests. Fields do not bully, they guide and give shape. The great comfort is that nothing in this story depends on attention. The planets keep their appointments whether anyone watches or not. Yet when you do watch, the appointments feel shared. A bright point rises where you expected it to. A loop appears in just the place you thought it might. A crescent tilts the way it should at your latitude in this season. The predictability is a pillow. You can rest your head on it and let detail blur without losing the shape. If you step outside after this and the sky's clear, you may see only a few of these threads at once. A bright lamp low in the west, a red ember climbing later, a pale belt of the Milky Way, where the roof opens to the deeper structure beyond. It is enough. The larger map is there whether you trace it or not. The distances are enormous, but the rules are human-sized in the way they repeat. You can keep their rhythm with breath. You can hold their scale with a fingertip covering a star. You can carry the whole system in a quiet picture behind your eyes, and it will still be accurate in the morning. The longer you live with the solar system in your thoughts, the more it feels like craft rather than spectacle. A handful of rules, well made, can shape 1,000 scenes. One says that a path bends in a smooth curve when a steady pull is present. Another says that what is moving keeps moving unless acted on. A third says that when two bodies tug on each other, they trade influence in exact measure, and the whole keeps its balance. From those simple ideas, ellipses appear, seasons turn, and tides move silently through rock and water. You do not need the symbols to feel the truth. You can sense it in the way a thrown object arcs and falls, in the way a pendulum slows and settles, in the way the moon keeps one face. Resonance is a quieter craft, but once you notice it, you see it everywhere. Tap a glass at just the right rate and the sound swells. Nudge a small body in the same place every few orbits and its path shifts. That is how gaps open in rings and belts, not by scraping, but by timing. It is how 3 moons can share a rhythm that warms their interiors without chaos. It is how swarms can live 60 degrees ahead of and behind a planet, pinned not by a rope but by a balance between motion and pull. The cosmos is full of pushes, but the interesting ones are repeated, and repetition becomes structure. Time is the master tool. Nothing here is hurried. A young disk takes millions of years to thin and settle. Pebbles become boulders over spans that stretch past human stories. Heat leaks from a giant world so slowly that whole species dawn and fade while the planet's glow declines by a fraction. Even on Earth, mountains rise and are worn down in cycles that take longer than languages last. When you place the solar system on that clock, ordinary weather becomes a quick mood, storms on a gas giant become seasons, and the shifting of orbits is like the growth rings in a very old tree. We learn the ages with clocks that do not tick but transform. Atoms in rocks quietly change from one kind to another at steady rates. Measure the mix in a meteorite, and you can read how long it has been cooling, how long it has been alone, how recently it was heated or shattered. Some grains inside those stones formed before the sun, bits of earlier stars that drifted into the cloud that made our system. They carry isotopic quirks like regional accents. To hold such a grain under a microscope is to touch an older chapter of the same book, written in a script of masses and decay that never lies. Water's story is also written in those ratios. The balance of heavy to light versions in comets and asteroids tells whether a particular source could have helped fill Earth's oceans. The answer is not a single delivery, not a one-time gift, but many small contributions over time, mostly from dark, carbon-rich bodies that matched our seas more closely. That scatter of deliveries fits the solar system's style. It prefers patience. It builds by accumulation and correction, not by sudden decree. You can think of the giant planets as editors of the draft. Their gravity tidied the early pages, clearing some paths and preserving others. The inner worlds kept rock and metal because heat near the centre lifted lighter materials away. The outer ones kept gas and ice because cold and time allowed large collections to grow deep. The line between those regimes is not a border but a gradient, like shade giving way to sun on a hillside. Move a little, and the possibilities change. Move a lot, and the characters of worlds diverge in ways that still rhyme with each other. Our ways of seeing have multiplied, and each new sense adds a layer without erasing the old. The eye alone shows dots and colours and motions against a dark field. Radio waves let us hear fields and particles. Infrared light shows warmth and the way it leaks. Ultraviolet traces high, thin air, and the places where sunlight breaks molecules apart and stitches them together again. X-rays and gamma rays mark the most energetic events, rare in our quiet system but not absent. None of these windows is noisy to a listener lying down. They are ways to turn faint signals into understanding, gentle instruments placed on a sleeping chest to hear the heartbeat of a star, a planet, a tail of dust. Even the emptiness has texture. Between worlds there is a breeze of particles and a fog of tiny grains. The breeze changes with the sun's mood. The fog thickens and thins with the slow grinding of stones and the breathing of comets. Spacecraft feel these textures as background, as small counts on detectors or faint drags on motion. Over long cruises, those small things matter, the way a very light wind can, over hours, carry a sailboat farther than a quick gust. When people ask where the edge is, the answer depends on what you mean by inside. The sun's wind carves a bubble that ends where the interstellar medium pushes back. The family of bound objects extends much farther, perhaps a quarter of the way to the nearest star, perhaps more. The light itself, if you draw the edge by how bright it is, fades smoothly and never truly ends. It becomes another star among many. In that sense, the boundary is not a wall, but a dimming, and the system is a room that opens into a larger house without doors. Nothing in this room is wasted. The same equations that carry a probe to a planet will describe a droplet rising from a geyser on a moon. The same balance that keeps a ring narrow will keep a pair of small bodies circling one another for eons. The same conservation that holds in a comet's long fall holds in the slow trade between Earth's spin and the moon's retreat. Once you accept that thrift, the system feels kind. It does not hide. It works in the open with rules that are few enough to count on your fingers. When the mind grows quiet, the map simplifies in the best way. A star at the centre. 4 small warm worlds, each with a lesson about heat and air and size. A belt of fragments that remembers the draft stage. A great planet with a family that could be a chapter of its own. A ringed world that makes mathematics visible. 2 distant giants that keep to themselves but pay attention to the same laws. A pasture of small worlds that fades into a shell of sleepers. You can carry that in a breath. You can bring it back tomorrow without effort. And while you sleep, every object will keep to its path, not because you remember it, but because the room itself remembers for you. On the world we know best, Long rhythms shape the ground beneath our feet, and the air we breathe, even when we notice only weather and seasons. Plates drift at the speed fingernails grow, carrying continents like rafts. Where plates pull apart, new crust wells up as dark ribbons on the ocean floor. Where they meet, one dives under another and melts to feed arcs of volcanoes. Elsewhere, they snag and grind, and a century of quiet ends in a minute of release. Mountains rise like slow handwriting and are sanded back down by water, ice, and time. None of this is hurried. You can stand on a headland and feel only wind, yet the rocks below you were once seabed, lifted and tilted, then gnawed by waves into the shelf you trust with your balance. Heat leaves the interior in gentle streams. Some travels through crust and is lost as a warmth too thin to feel directly. Some gathers along fractures and mid-ocean ridges or pools in chambers that one day find a path to the sky. Even when a volcano is far away and inactive, it has already done its part. The air we know was adjusted over ages by such breathing, and by life itself, in a dialogue that never stops. Carbon cycles from rock to air to ocean and back. Plants take light apart and make sugars. Animals borrow that energy and return the products. Shells lock carbon in stone that will one day be raised, altered or melted and set free again. The circle runs slowly enough that a person can forget it is running at all, and steadily enough that a planet keeps habits across ice ages and interludes of warmth. The tilt of Earth wobbles, the path around the sun stretches and shrinks a little, and the direction of our axis traces a slow circle in the sky. Those cycles are long. They tune sunlight by small amounts and help set the rhythm of glaciers that grow, pause, and retreat over tens of thousands of years. Ice sheets press down a continent and then, as they thin and lift, the ground rebounds like a cushion regaining its shape. Rivers find new routes. Coasts redraw themselves. Forests migrate step by quiet step. We inherit the shapes those pulses left. Long valleys scratched by ice. Boulder fields dropped where streams of meltwater slowed. Subtle terraces that show old shorelines where lakes stood when the climate leaned another way. The ocean is the planet's memory and its gentle engine. Surface waters move with wind and Earth's rotation, drawing great gyres that carry heat from one latitude to another. In some regions, warm water gives up heat to the air and grows dense enough to sink, beginning a long journey through the deep that can take centuries. Elsewhere, cold, nutrient-rich water rises to the light and feeds blooms that colour the sea from space. The tides lean and fall under the moon's pull and the sun's, and those slight motions stir shelves and bays, mix shallows with deeper layers, and keep coasts breathing. The same pull that locks one face of the moon toward us keeps the rhythm of our shores and tugs the whole crust by millimeters, a lift you cannot feel, and yet which everything feels together. Life writes in feedbacks that are mostly kind. Forests draw carbon and store it in wood and soil. Wetlands filter water and make slow meadows. Reefs build frameworks that shelter fish and delay waves. Sometimes the feedbacks become sharp, and the system tests a new balance for a while before finding another. The way fire clears a forest and makes room for a fresh choir of species. Or a warm period shifts the range of rains and the routes of birds. The rules are simple. The results are detailed. What stays, stays, because loops close and wastes are food for something else. That logic is the same that keeps a ring narrow, or an ocean under ice alive with chemistry, flows, balances, patience. Above the ground, the air keeps its own layered poetry. Close to the surface, warm parcels rise and cool as they lift, then spread as cloud, then fall as rain or drift as vapour to become cloud again. Higher up, winds draw rivers of fast air that steer storms and ripple across continents. Higher still, sunlight breaks molecules apart and stitches them back together, and tenuous gases glow when struck by particles from space. At night, when the ground cools quickly and air lies still, scents linger, and sound carries a little farther. At dawn, the lowest layer mixes again, and the world becomes crisp to the senses. These quiet cycles are small beside planetary history and large beside human moments. You're made to notice both scales, the near and the far, and that is why the same sky can comfort you whether you watch a cloud edge soften or a planet rise. None of this is outside the solar system's larger arrangement. The sun is the metronome. Distance sets the key. Mass sets the depth of the notes. Earth's field, wound in its turning metal core, keeps much of the solar wind at arm's length and funnels the rest to make auroras that paint the night. The moon steadies the tilt enough to keep seasons from wandering as wildly as they might. The giant's early hands on the disk helped decide how much building material reached inward and how often. The far reservoirs still send, now and then, a small body to write a blue line across our atmosphere and remind us of the long routes outside our weather. When people ask what makes Earth special, the first answers are measurements: distance, mass, composition, moon size, a bit of radioactivity to keep the interior warm, a cool enough top to hold oceans. The deeper answer is that the loops close cleanly. Light comes in and is shared sensibly. Water moves and returns. Nutrients cycle. Waste rarely remains waste for long. Over deep time, those loops survived blows and pauses, adjusted in new balances and kept running. The same thrift and patience run from Mercury's wrinkled crust to Pluto's soft glaciers and back again. But here they found a path that includes breath and thought, and the ease of lying under a sky and feeling that it belongs to you as much as you belong to it. If you step outside on a night with a mild wind and an open view, you can feel both the local and the cosmic at once. Air has a temperature that remembers the day. Trees move at the pace of nearby gusts. Far above, a bright point marks a world you visited in thought tonight. Between them is an atmosphere that carries faint meteors, and on rare nights paints green arcs at the edge of sight. None of this argues. It simply coexists. Nested rhythms from seconds to millennia sharing the same room. Knowing that is not a weight. It is a soft support. It tells you that the thing you are part of has coherence, and that you can sleep inside it safely while continents inch, oceans turn, and the planets keep their quiet rounds. We didn't always know this map. For most of our history, the sky was a record kept by memory and shared in stories. People watched where the sun rose along the horizon and marked its pauses with stones. They counted the nights between thin crescents and full circles. They tracked the wanderers against the steady patterns and learned their habits well enough to plant and to sail. The rules were present the whole time, but it took a long while to say them plainly. A few careful minds measured with patience and found that the paths were not perfect circles, but gentle ellipses, that speed changed in a regular way, and that the farther a world sits from the sun, the longer its year must be. Those ideas were simple and hard at once, simple because the curves were smooth, hard because they asked us to let go of old pictures and stand in a new room where the sun, not Earth, sat at the centre. Once that shift settled, another followed. The same pull that brings an apple down, we learned, curves the moon's path and keeps the planets from flying away. Gravity needed no special rules for this or that object. One law held across all scales, quiet and universal. With that in the mind, prediction became clean. Where would a world be next month? Where would it be a century from now? You could write the answers and be right. You could draw a path for a craft and let it coast most of the way, touching the engine only to trim and to settle. The solar system went from a painting to a working model on a table you could spin with a fingertip. Glass made the model sharper. A tube, a lens, and a steady hand turned points into discs and revealed phases where none were expected. A small world showed mountains and shadows that marched across its face each long day. Another revealed a thick veil and no solid markings to track. One grew ears that later were seen as a ring. A blue-green lamp was found farther out than any known at the time, and its discovery widened the room we thought we understood. Later, a mathematician read small wobbles and predicted a world you could not yet see, and the sky gave it up in the place the numbers suggested. The method mattered. It said the map could be extended with thought and care, not guesswork. Pictures followed that no eye alone could take. Cameras on towers of metal left Earth and turned back to look at the family from afar. A pair of long travellers swept past the giants and sent home views of storms, rings, and moons that turned out to be whole worlds in miniature. We learned that volcanoes rage where light is weak, but tides are strong. We learned that smooth ice can hide deep seas, and that small bodies carry grooves and boulders and shapes made by a gravity so gentle that a hill can be as tall as a mountain would be here. Another craft slid through a haze and dropped a small lab by parachute onto a cold shore, where liquid pooled and ran in a cycle that echoed rain at home. Another flew past a distant dwarf world and caught a heart of nitrogen ice, fresh enough to shine. The returns became more intimate. Instead of only looking, we reached out tiny hands. Machines touched stones and tasted them. Some drilled, some scooped and sealed and sent a capsule home through fire to open in clean rooms. Under microscopes, grains spoke in lines and ratios. They told temperatures they had known and times they had cooled. They told whether water had been present and whether carbon compounds were simple or many. A sample the weight of a breath carried centuries of answers, not all at once, but slowly, as instruments improved and questions became sharper. We also learned to listen across colours our eyes cannot see. Warmth drew maps in infrared, showing where heat leaks and where clouds hide it. Radio waves bent around fields and hummed with electrons caught in belts. Ultraviolet showed the high, thin places where sunlight breaks apart and rebuilds. Even particles that almost never touch anything told their tale when they passed through huge pools built underground to count them. And those counts matched the power of the star's heart and said the furnace within was steady. Each window added trust. The more we looked, the more the few rules proved enough. You can trace a quiet line from a person noting a bright point on a winter morning to an engine lighting for a few minutes to adjust a path 1 billion kilometres from home. The line is the habit of measuring, checking, and letting the sky correct us. When a prediction fails, the correction becomes a new tool. When a prediction holds, the confidence to try something harder grows. That is how we arrived at the edge of the sun's wind and crossed into space between the stars with a machine that still speaks in a faint voice. It is how we learned that the wind itself spirals, that its boundary breathes with the cycle of storms on the surface of the star, and that the pressure of the galaxy beyond is real and gentle and old. Soon we will add more pages. A craft will skim the ice of a moon and listen for the hum of a deep sea. Another will circle a giant and weigh its core with the tug of a field. Another will fly like a small drone through thick cold air and watch lakes from a height a bird would know. Pieces of other worlds will come home sealed, and we'll ask them quiet questions in rooms where air is filtered and gloves reach through glass. The tools change, the tone does not. It is patient, careful, and grateful for small certainties. None of this loudens the sky. It stays soft. The planets will not care if we know their densities to 6 decimals instead of 3. But we will care, because each decimal is a little more belonging. It lets a listener close their eyes and say not only that a ring is thin, but how thin. Not only that a wind is swift, but how swift. Not only that an ocean may lie under ice, but how deep, how salty, and how it moves. Knowledge here is not a trophy. It is a pillow stitched from numbers, steady enough to rest on while the long rhythms carry on. Scale can feel harsh until you learn the soft way to hold it. Start with one simple span. The distance from Earth to the Sun. Call it 1 unit. Light crosses that space in a little more than 8 minutes. You can feel 8 minutes. It is the time it takes for a kettle to heat and a cup to cool. Every other distance in the family can be thought of as so many cups of light time. The giant with the bands is many cups away. The ringed world is more. The far belt is measured in long, quiet hours. The shell of sleepers would take months for light to cross, if we could see the edge at all. When you turn enormous spaces into patient minutes and hours, they stop pushing you away. They sit beside you like a friend who has time. Mass has the same trick. Numbers that sound like thunder can be turned gentle. The sun holds almost all the weight, and the rest is a scattering. The giants have enough to bend paths far beyond where they sit, and the small worlds have enough to pull themselves round and keep a companion. But the rule beneath is kindly and exact. Double the distance, and the pull softens by 4. Double it again, and it softens by 16. Currents in a river do the same with width and depth. Light through a window does the same with distance and spread. The mind already knows how smooth fall-off feels. The sky simply applies it with more patience. Time is the third kindness. The system does not hurry. An orbit is a promise kept in years. A field breathes in cycles that last longer than a school career and shorter than a life. Ice creeps in planes that reset maps in spans that no one person will see, and yet the direction is steady enough to be trusted. Even sudden things are part of slow arcs. A bright visitor with a tail is a page in a book that was written far out and will be read again when it returns. A storm that wraps a gas giant in pale cloud is weather inside a climate that remembers many such events. With practice, you can feel both the flash and the background. The flash is for the eyes, the background is for sleeping well. There is a quiet way to think about gravity that removes the idea of pulling all together. Imagine the room itself is curved by the presence of mass, the way a sheet sags under a heavy bowl. Anything moving follows the straightest path the room allows. Straight lines on a curved surface look bent to someone who expects a flat floor. Planets are not being yanked around a corner, they're taking the simplest path through a space that is gently shaped. Even light, which has no rest and no weight of its own, takes that curved route near large bodies. Nothing in that picture is cruel. It is a geometry lesson taught with patience and no raised voice. From geometry comes a small, humane gift: frames of reference. You can sit in a train and feel still while the platform slides backward. You can sit on Earth and feel still while the sky turns. You can sit in a craft and feel weight when an engine pushes, then feel nothing when it stops and lets the curve of the path carry you. None of those feelings is wrong. They are views of the same truth from different seats. The system allows all those seats and keeps the story consistent between them. That consistency is a quilt. You can sleep under it. There is also a softness in how energy moves. Heat flows from warm to cool and then rests. Motion can be traded for height and back again without loss if you are careful, like a child on a swing who pumps at the right times and then lets momentum do the work. The family of worlds runs on thrift. Rings remain narrow because wasted motion is trimmed by countless small meetings. Oceans under ice stay liquid because tides turn orbital bookkeeping into gentle warmth. Even dust in the inner rooms finds lanes and glows where sunlight, though weak grain by grain, adds up along the plane. The senses we use to learn this all share the same character. None needs a shout. A prism splits light and shows fingerprints of gases with lines that are faint but reliable. A dish listens for a whisper from a craft farther than any human has ever travelled, and hears it cleanly because the rules that carry a radio wave through space are the same simple rules that let you tune a station at home. A thermometer that sees warmth rather than colour turns a blank-looking scene into a map of currents and leaks. These tools do not change the world, they reveal it gently, which is why their reports make good company at night. If you want one more quiet handle, use ratios. The blue giant's day is shorter than ours by many hours, so winds couple to rotation in a way that makes bands. The red neighbour's gravity is weaker, so air lifts dust more easily and holds it longer. The bright morning lantern orbits closer than we do, and shows phases because of that nearness. Ratios turn nouns into relations. They tell you why a thing is the size it is, not just that it is large or small. Relations are restful. They let the mind stack facts without strain because each one has a place on a grid you already understand. All these views sit well with the simple human experience of looking up. You do not need to recite an equation to feel that a planet is brighter when it is near and high. You do not need to name a resonance to notice that certain stars sit where a path crosses the same background month after month. The deep knowledge lives in glass domes and quiet rooms full of instruments, and the light knowledge lives in gardens and on balconies. They do not argue, one feeds the other. The careful measures make the casual glance richer. The casual glance gives meaning to the careful measures. Together they make the map not only accurate, but friendly. So scale softens into minutes and cups of light. Mass softens into a fall-off your hands have felt in other guises. Time softens into loops and breaths that you can count without a clock. Geometry softens into the idea that the room itself is shaped, and that movement is just good manners in such a room. Energy softens into thrift and exchange. Senses soften into tools that hear whispers. Ratios soften into relations that fit the mind's shelves. With all that softness, the system does not grow vague. It grows livable. You can bring it to bed like a book you trust. Close your eyes on a sentence about a ring or an ocean under ice, and know that the story will still be true when you wake. People have always carried the sky in their heads, long before names and numbers filled books. Farmers watched where dawn arrived along a hill and knew when to plant. Sailors learned the feel of a swell and the tilt of star lanes, and a course appeared out of the wind and memory. Travellers in open country noticed which bright wanderer hugged the sun, and which one rose late and high, and the calendar inside them kept good time. You can do the same from a balcony. Learn one bright point in the west at dusk, and you will start to sense the slow swing of its loop. Learn the pale band where the Milky Way drifts, and you will feel the year roll as that river of stars turns to a new angle in each season. In the south, a small diamond of stars tips and pivots through the night. Its long axis points to a place in the dark where the world's spin meets the sky. From that clue you can tell direction without speaking, as if the system were whispering this way in a language made of geometry. In the north, a different pair of patterns plays the guide. Near the equator, the whole ceiling seems to flow, and a person can cross oceans by setting a course on the horizon and letting a star rise where it should. None of that needs a stopwatch. The solar system writes gentle lines you can trace with your hand, and the lines stay faithful year after year. Stories grew around those lines. A bright lamp that never strays far from the sun became a herald of morning and evening. A red ember that waxes every couple of years became a sign of approach, then retreat. The long, thin curve of a comet carried news, sometimes fear, sometimes wonder, always a reminder that the outer rooms still send visitors. Eclipses became shared silences, and a thin crescent holding the faint outline of its own dark side taught people to see light reflected from Earth without a word of physics. The facts we carry now do not erase any of that. They deepen it. Knowing why a crescent leans the way it does at your latitude makes the tilt friendlier. Knowing why two bright worlds meet low in the dusk turns a pretty sight into an appointment kept by orbits that are true to the second. Navigation turned into a craft that could be taught, a sextant, a horizon, a table of star positions, and the Earth revealed where you were on its surface with no other help. Later, clocks good enough to carry the sun's beat at sea let longitude fall out of an angle and a time. The family of worlds moving under a steady law gave practical gifts: harvest timing, safe passages, festivals that matched the sky, a way to find home when land was a rumour. Even now, when a handset does the sums, the method rests on the same kindness. Objects in clean orbits tell the time to machines that listen, and your path on Earth is drawn by listening to many clocks at once and letting the geometry agree. The art of noticing remains the same whether the tool is an eye or a camera. You do not need to know that Jupiter's day is about 10 hours to feel why its clouds band so neatly. You do not need the exact tilt of Earth to predict that summer will move the sun's arc north or south, and draw a different length of shadow from your hand on a wall. You do not need the word for the plane of the system to notice that the planets keep to a shared lane, and so do most of the shooting stars. The body learns by watching, and the mind gives the watching names later. That order is gentle. It is why the same ceiling comforts children who count nights to a full moon, and astronomers who count spectral lines to find sodium in a cloud hundreds of millions of kilometers away. Cultures shaped by different coasts and soils read the same sky with different poems, and the poems agree more than they argue. A river in the heavens marks a season to travel or to rest. A rising star near dawn calls a kind of work into the fields. A cluster low in the west says winter is coming, or the rains, or the time to mend nets and tell stories. Those signals exist because the solar system is a clock too large to fit in a room, and yet patient enough to be kept with a stick's shadow and a memory for angles. When you step into that clock, even for a few minutes at dusk, the day changes flavour. You have joined something that does not notice you and yet makes room for your attention, as if it had been waiting. The same joining can be private and small. A person learns the smell of evening after heat, the way the first star appears near where the sun went down, the hush that arrives when traffic thins and the breeze lifts leaves into a softer sound. A satellite slides by as a moving point, and for half a minute you share its path with your eyes. Then it fades into Earth's shadow and is gone, still there, only hidden. You return indoors with that line drawn where no line is, and sleep comes easier because the ceiling above your room has become part of a map that reaches from your street to the belt of slow worlds and the cloud beyond. All of it turning in time with a star that is generous without being loud. Tomorrow the same sky will be a little different and exactly the same. The bright evening lamp will set a finger width earlier. The moon will have shifted a fist along the ecliptic. The dim wedge of dust light before dawn will lean at a new angle as the season walks forward. If you forget to look, nothing is lost. If you remember to look, nothing is demanded. The system offers a calm exchange, attention for belonging. The more often you pay attention, the more often belonging answers back. In that trade there is no rush, no test, no noise. There's only a long, quiet invitation to feel at home in a room made of motion and light. Wonder grows quiet when it has somewhere to sit. A windowsill is enough. You lean an elbow and let the night breathe through the screen, and the map you've been carrying unfolds without effort. The sun is a warm centre that does not boast. The small worlds inside keep their patient habits. The giants hold court in the cool and edit the flow with gravity and time. Beyond them, fragments and sleepers circle in wide rooms. It sounds like a litany, but it isn't. It's a way of noticing that order survives distance. It helps to remember that our kind has touched only a little of this with hands and machines, and yet the little has been enough to prove a style. Wherever we look closely, we find thrift and repetition. Rings are just disks that never became moons. Moons are just worlds that happen to keep company with larger ones. Oceans can hide under ice if tides lend a steady allowance of heat. Winds wrap into bands when rotation is quick and air is deep. Even dust, given time and lanes, learns to glow in a soft wedge before dawn and after dusk. You do not need to memorize details to rest in that. The patterns keep themselves. When people ask where life might be in this family besides here, the answers are gentle and conditional. A dark ocean under bright ice, warmed by tides and rock, is a good laboratory. A plume that carries salts and simple organics to space is a good invitation. A thick, cold air that lets liquids carve channels and pool in lakes is a good echo of cycles we know. None of these places are hospitable to a walk without gear or a breath without tanks. That is not the relevant measure. The relevant measure is chemical patience, steady energy, and time. The solar system provides those in small rooms as readily as in large ones, and that generosity is worth a moment of gratitude before sleep. There is kindness in the way navigation works too. A craft can leave Earth with a modest push, fall for a while like any stone, and then borrow speed from a planet that never notices the gift is gone, because the book balances in the third or fourth decimal where no one lives. The craft turns, coasts, and arrives with most of its fuel still in its tanks, as if the room itself wanted visitors who are quiet and clever. When they get where they're going, they do not need to shout for the world to answer. A seismometer feels a moon's interior breathe. A magnetometer hears a salty sea hum. A camera catches light reflected from frost grains that were rocks' neighbours for a very long time. Each reading is a whisper, and together the whispers draw lines that match what we expected and add detail we hadn't imagined. Scale does not keep you out. It gives you rooms, minutes for sunlight to cross your orbit, hours for it to reach a giant, days for it to skim the far belt, months and years for a shell of sleepers you cannot see. The heart can hold those spans the way it holds songs, shifting tempo without strain. You already move easily between seconds and seasons in ordinary life, a kettle's hiss, a school year's arc, a friend's decade of stories. The system asks for nothing more than that same flexibility. Breathe for the short measures, remember for the long ones, let the very long ones keep themselves while you rest. There are, of course, sudden things. A large rock meets a world at speed and writes a basin in an hour that will last as a landmark for 100 million years. A planet's field grows stormy and fills a sky with curtains none of its creatures commanded. A geyser on a small moon switches on and off as the crust flexes by millimeters. Sudden does not mean senseless. Each event fits a curve you can trace backward and forward through time. When you learn to see the curve, the surprise loses its edge and keeps its beauty. It is easy to imagine the system as an argument about heat, where it is, how it moves, how it fades. That is not wrong. Heat rules chemistry and air and ice. But you could also think of it as an argument about grace. Paths adjust instead of break. Exchanges balance without ledgers. Small tugs repeated become architecture. The whole is tolerant of error. If a craft misses a window, there is another. If a comet sheds more mass this time around, it will come dim next visit and still write a page you can read. If a storm closes one route, a different lane opens later with the same fidelity to the same few rules. When the map returns to you tomorrow, as it will, try placing one detail on it and letting the rest grow around it without force. Put your attention on the thin line of the moon's light where it meets the dark and notice how soft that boundary is when the air is steady. Put your attention on a bright evening lamp and watch how it slips a little closer to the horizon night by night. Put your attention on the way dusk holds colour for a breath longer after the hottest day of the year. These are not tests, they are stitches. Each one ties your street to the system in a way you can feel, with your shoulders dropping and your jaw unclenching. The planets will keep their rounds whether you do any of this or not. That is part of the comfort. You're not responsible for the sky. You're simply welcome to share its rhythm. The welcome is unconditional and renewable. It does not expire if you miss a week or a season. It is waiting even if clouds have owned your horizon for months. The clock does not resent late arrivals. It only keeps time and makes room. If there is a lesson to carry from this long drift, it is small enough to write on a slip of paper and place beside your bed. Light travels with patience. Gravity curves without cruelty. Heat moves from warm to cool and rests. Time turns repetition into structure. Attention trades for belonging. You do not need more than that to feel at home in the family of worlds. And once you feel at home, every night is an open door, and every clear patch of sky is enough. Patterns return like familiar chords, and each return makes the room feel more coherent. A thin disk of dust around a young star is a promise. Later you see that promise echoed as rings around a planet, and again as faint arcs around a small distant body. A moon that keeps one face to its parent is a lesson in tides. The same lesson explains why oceans can hide and stir under ice when an orbit is gently squeezed in rhythm. A banded atmosphere on a giant says rotation and depth are talking to each other. Smaller bands in thinner air on a modest world say, the conversation continues in a softer voice. You start to recognize these rhymes without trying. They stitch the far and the near into one fabric, so that the leap from a backyard sky to a plume at the edge of sunlight feels shorter each time you make it. Even the ways things fail to repeat are restful once you notice their reasons. A ring breaks into clumps where a shepherd moon leans on it too often. A belt shows gaps where a distant giant's timing quietly empties a lane. A storm refuses symmetry because underlying heat flows are lopsided in a way you can state and measure. Variations are not noise, they are place names. They mark where the same rule met a different starting point and wrote a different honest sentence. The comfort comes from knowing that if you change the starting point back, the sentence would change back too. Nothing in this family is arbitrary for long. Order does not mean tidiness everywhere you look, it means thrift. Angular momentum is saved and traded like a cherished coin, not spent thoughtlessly. Energy slips from warm to cool and pauses when the gradient is gone. Material that cannot make a planet still finds a role as a ring, a moonlet, a veil of dust that catches light and makes a soft triangle in the dusk. Even debris from a collision becomes an archive or a seed for something smaller and beautiful. The more you look, the harder it is to find waste that stays waste. The system prefers loops, and loops turn leftovers into structure. From time to time, a page turns loudly. An impact writes a basin. A global storm wraps a giant in pale cloud. A comet blossoms and draws a sword of light across months. Loud is not the end of gentle. Those pages are still bound into slow arcs. The basin becomes a sea for a while, and then a dry map of channels. The storm settles and leaves faint traces that the next one will echo. The comet dims and returns, thinner but still legible, a scribe who keeps an old appointment. When something truly singular passes, a traveller from another star, a rare geometry that paints a shadow across noon, It does not break the book. It adds a footnote that reminds you the room has doors. If there is a centre to the pattern, it is not the sun alone, but the conversation between gravity and time. Gravity curves paths. Time lets those curves integrate into arrangements. Give the same pull an instant and you get a deflection. Give it an age and you get lanes, families, resonances, shells. The outcome is patient architecture. Rings sharpened at the edges, belts sifted by rhythm, moons locked into dances that warm them inside without a flame. Once you feel that, the family stops being a list and becomes a mood you can recognize anywhere, like the smell of a house you grew up in. Living with that mood changes how small things feel. A shadow from a railing creeping across a floor becomes a tidy echo of a Terminator gliding over craters at lunar dawn. A kettle's steam drawing curls against a cold window, whispers of buoyant plumes and cloud tops seen from far away. The low thud of surf under a pier keeps the same patient count as tides lifted by a moon you cannot see through cloud. None of these are metaphors you have to force. They arrive on their own once the map is settled in your chest. The world and the sky stop being separate subjects and become two scales of one conversation. You might worry that knowing too much would strip the feeling from the dark, the way explaining a joke can bruise it. Here the opposite is true. Names and numbers soften awe into something the body can keep. When you learn that a morning star is a world inside Earth's orbit and that its phases will grow fat or thin, in step with angles you can draw with a hand and a thumb, it does not shrink, it joins you. When you know that the red ember climbing late is near, and that its colour will deepen as its dust rises and its air thins with season, it doesn't become less mysterious. It becomes a neighbour you recognise by stride. Detail is not weight here, it is warmth. The map you have carried through this night has been large, but it has not been heavy. A centre that glows by fusing light elements. 4 small worlds close in, each a study in heat, air, and history. A belt of fragments that remembers the draft. 2 giants with deep weather and long families. 2 cooler giants that keep a quieter council. A distant pasture of small worlds, faint rings, shared orbits, and slow exchanges, fading into a shell of sleepers that the galaxy nudges now and then. Threads run between all of them, rings and disks, tides and locks, winds and bands, fields and curtains, plumes and oceans hidden from the sun. You do not need to hold all of it at once. The system is kind. It will meet you wherever you set your attention, and grow the rest around that point while you breathe. We've travelled outward and inward, across minutes of light and hours, across orbits measured in a handful of your years, and some that would outlast civilizations. The family has kept its demeanour throughout. Calm, exact, tolerant of delay, ready to reward patience with clarity. There is one more step to take, and it is not far. It is simply the step of letting the picture that filled the room a moment ago become the felt sense beneath your ribs that says the picture will still be true when your eyes close. There is a moment, often right before sleep, when a map becomes a feeling. Names fade and the outline remains, a star at the centre, paths that curve with good manners, worlds that keep promises measured in years and ages. Water finding ways to move, even in cold rooms under ice. Winds writing bands where rotation is quick and air is deep. Dust learning to glow where lanes are shared. You don't have to hold any of it tightly. You let it sit, and it settles into you like a tide coming to the same quiet mark. Think of the sun not as a blaze but as a pulse. Light leaves in clean lines that take their time. Cross the space, touch stone and sea, and turn to warmth and weather and food and breath. What does not stay keeps going, outward into dark, and spends itself gently until it rests. everything in this family is a version of that, a gift that travels, changes form, and comes to balance without waste. Even gravity feels like a patient conversation when you hold it this way. A pull here, a pause there, the long average turning motion into order. We live inside the conversation. Our year is one line of it. Our day is another. The small seasons of a person's life sit like chords over slower seasons that move coastlines and raise and lower rain. It is easy to feel separate from the larger rhythms because our senses are tuned to shorter notes. But the comfort of the solar system is that the longer notes never stop, and you can step into them whenever you like. Walk out at dusk and watch the first bright planet lift above a roofline. Lean on a railing and notice how a crescent tilts. Stand in a patch of cold air and feel that the sun is lower than last month. You're counting a clock that has been running since before there were clocks. If your mind asks why this brings calm, the answer is that pattern lowers effort. The map does not fight you. Heat flows in one direction. Momentum is kept and traded. Orbits are agreements between speed and curve, not contests. Noise exists, but it is thin and brief compared to the harmony beneath. Even surprises arrive on curves you can trace. A comet that blooms has been inbound for years. A storm that wraps a giant has been brewing in slow, deep air. An eclipse that hushes a town could have been marked on a slate a lifetime ago. When your thoughts learn to expect continuity, they unclench. Sleep finds the space it needs. None of this cancels wonder. Knowing that a small moon's ocean is warmed by tides makes it more miraculous, not less, because it shows how many paths to livable chemistry the room allows. Knowing that a ring is made of countless pieces in clean lanes makes each sparkle of ice more precious, not less, because it is sparkle with a story. Knowing that a meteor shower is Earth moving through a wide, thin river of old dust lets each brief line be both a wish and a fact. Wonder that is grounded lasts longer. It does not flare and fade. It glows the way a planet glows long after sunset. It helps to think of yourself as a good citizen of this order. You keep small promises in rhythm with larger ones. You sleep and wake under the same field that draws curtains of light at the poles. You drink water that was lifted by sunlight and returned by gravity. You breathe air stirred by the spin of a world that learned its habits long ago. You notice and you pass the noticing on. That is all that is required. Attention is a form of belonging here, and belonging is the whole point of a map like this. If, in the quiet to come, thoughts worry at the edges, give them a slow task the sky has already solved. Count 8 heartbeats for the time it takes light to come from the sun to Earth, and double it again to reach the next rooms. Picture the plane where the planets keep their lanes and set one bright dot moving along it at a pace you can keep with breath. Recall a tide lifting and letting go, and let your lungs answer in the same count. These are not tricks, they're translations. They turn distances and years into measures the body understands. You can let the family of worlds take care of itself now. The giant will keep its bands and its storm. The ringed world will keep its thin halo and its lakes of cold liquid under orange air. The tipped one will keep its long seasons. The deep blue one will keep its swift winds and its captured companion. The small, distant worlds will keep their slow exchanges of frost and haze and light. The cloud of sleepers will keep its hush. The star will keep its pulse. None of it needs you to watch. All of it welcomes you when you do. The room dims. The map reduces to a few gentle strokes and then to nothing you need to hold. The last thought can be as small as this. The system is kind, and I am inside it. When morning comes, the same kindness will be there, wrapped in weather and errands and the ordinary sounds of a day. For now, rest. And if this quiet kept you company, You're welcome to subscribe whenever it suits you, so this space is easy to find again. The dark is steady and the map holds without being held. Somewhere a tide turns on a rocky shore and then turns back. Somewhere a thin frost settles in the shadow of a crater that has not seen noon in a million years. Somewhere a faint jet of water rises from a crack in ice and falls as snow no one will ever touch. All of it continues whether you name it or not. That is the comfort. The family of worlds keeps its long promises, and you can borrow that reliability for your own rest. Think of a single beam of sunlight leaving the surface of the star. It travels in a straight line through space gently curved by gravity. It passes the orbit of Mercury in moments, touches the high clouds of Venus, crosses the quiet lane of Earth and would warm your cheek if you were standing in open light, then continues on through the belt where fragments drift, out past the bands and the rings, into the cooler rooms where methane turns the air blue. Most of those beams miss every world and carry on. They're not disappointed. They simply go where there is room. The few that meet rock or sea become warmth, wind, growth, memory. They lift water into air. They stir weather. They charge a leaf, and that leaf becomes part of a forest, and that forest becomes part of a breath you take without thinking. The same sunlight that left the star as a clean thread ends up as tide, cloud, fruit, thought. Nothing is wasted. It just changes rooms. Even far out where the sun is only a sharp point in a black sky, the same beam still means something. It can wake a sleeping comet and pull a pale tail from dark ice. It can tint a haze above a dwarf world and lay a soft highlight along the edge of a nitrogen glacier. It can paint a ring so faint you'd never see it with your eyes, but a camera would, and that thin brightness would tell you a moon is shedding grains a few at a time, patiently feeding the orbit it keeps. The light grows weaker with distance, but it never stops being gentle work. Gravity, too, keeps working in places no one is watching. A small moon leans a little against its planet and raises a bulge, and that bulge moves, and that movement turns orbital push into interior warmth. An icy shell flexes by a few millimeters and cracks just enough to let ocean water touch rock and pick up minerals that life would love if life is there to love it. A slow drift outward of one companion and a slow drift inward of another settles stress that would otherwise break them. None of this is loud. It is bookkeeping in the background, the universe practicing good balance. You sit in that balance. Your bones are calcium from old seas on Earth. The iron in your blood was forged in stars that lived and died before our sun was born. The oxygen in your lungs was set free by life that learned how to borrow sunlight and store it. The warmth on your skin tonight, or the cooled air on your face if the window is open, began in the core of the sun and crossed space for you specifically, and also for everyone else, and also for no one in particular at all. That mix, personal, shared, indifferent, is strangely peaceful. You matter, and you're not in charge. You belong, and you're not responsible for keeping the sky running. You're carried. If thoughts start spinning, you can let them follow one beam of light outward. Past Earth, past Mars, past the belt, past the giant with its storm, past the ringed world and its pale plumes, past the tipped blue-green one and the deep blue one with its fast winds, out toward the slow little worlds that trade frost and turn in silence. Keep going until the sun is just a bright star in a field of other bright stars. Hold that picture. Notice that nothing falls apart. Notice that everything is still in place. Then let the picture shrink gently, like dimming a lamp. The far shells go first, then the distant giants and their families, then the belt and the red world and our moon. Then just Earth, turning under weather, coasts breathing in and out, cities glowing like embers, quiet rooms holding sleeping people. Then just you, breathing in a rhythm you did not have to invent. The map will still be there in the morning. The orbits will still hold. The sun will still rise. You don't have to do anything now except rest.